Welcome to Best Practices and Experiences for Transnational Learning, Integration and Language Learning. This is not just a podcast. It is an exploration of innovative ways to empower migrant children and their families. The AMIF Fund supports the initiative as part of the Schools in Hub project aimed at creating a more welcoming society, proud to protect children's rights, and a more inclusive school as a cultural hub able to lead preschool children with a migrant background in learning a new language. Join us on this exciting journey to discover good practices that create connections between different countries.
Hi everyone, I'm Tony from Parents Association Step by Step from Zagreb, Croatia, and today we're making a podcast for SCHOOLINHUB project on the topic of language learning for migrants and their children in Croatia. With me is Kristijan Lepešić. He's a language teacher with a long experience of teaching migrants Croatian language. Hi Kristijan.
Hi.
Can you tell me a bit about yourself and your background and how you started teaching Croatian to migrants?
Yes, so I'm Kristijan Lepešić and I'm a lead coordinator in IDEMO, Institute for Democracy. And we're an organization that is, one of our main projects is language teaching to migrants and refugees and displaced persons, as well as currently workers from foreign countries that are currently in Croatia. Our project of language teaching started with the Ukraine situation, so the Russian aggression against the Ukrainian state and influx of a very large number of Ukrainians who were displaced into Croatia and who were immediately looking for a possibility to acquire language skills, to possibly look for jobs and so on. I started because I had a personal angle, and there were two children that I fostered from Ukraine, and since they were at the very end of high school and needed to enroll in university, I wanted to make sure that by September, so before the fall enrollment into university, they would be able to at least understand some Croatian and be able to follow some of the lectures in university. We organized this as part of a project and we involved others as well. At the beginning, we did a very intensive course. We did 3 hours of Croatian learning a day, 5 times a week. And indeed, within a couple of months, Ukrainian refugees were able to speak Croatian at a very competent level. Of course, it's a very similar language in the same group of Slavic languages, so they were able to acquire it quite fast. Later on, we expanded that ambition of teaching others the language, and because we saw the positive effects of them integrating into society much better, and also helping them deal with focusing on something else rather than the tragedies and horrors that their families were experiencing back home. We expanded it also to other groups.
What are some of the most common struggles migrants share with you regarding learning Croatian?
It depends on a group that we are working on, but some of the most common struggles that we see is, especially from a non-Slavic speakers of languages, so excluding Ukrainians, it is the complexity of grammar and the fact that the grammar is vastly different. I would say one of the most funniest comment was when we were teaching the accusative case in Croatian, and then complexity of grammar, how the words actually change at the end, and they constantly change, even your name can change. And one of the migrants raised the hand and says, I just have a question. You're like, yeah, go ahead. He says, do you actually speak like that, or is it just for us to learn? It's like, well, no, it's not just to torture foreigners. We actually do speak like that. We do change words. So I think the shock of constantly changing the words and both nouns and verbs and adjectives, I think that's one of the most common struggle. Also, the problem is that if the migrants come from countries where they do not speak a second language like English, so that becomes a barrier for us in trying to explain the grammar, because then you're explaining a grammar through an insufficient understanding of the English language on their side, and that becomes a problem. So I would say the biggest struggle is to understand what we are trying to explain through grammar.
How does knowing Croatian help migrants integrate into Croatian society?
Since migrations into Croatian society are fairly a recent phenomenon, of course, we remember that in 2014, 2015, when there was a wave of refugees from Iraq and Syria, but these were mostly transitioning through Croatia. The large waves of migrants is a recent phenomenon. I would say with the Ukrainian situation developing, that's when we had a first wave, and then after that we had subsequent waves from different migrant groups, either from Pakistan, Afghanistan, some from Iran, and then African continent as well. So we could see that Croatian society is a fairly compact and homogeneous group of people that does speak foreign languages, but primarily English or German, not necessarily languages that would be beneficial to, for instance, our African migrants, so not French or any other language. So learning Croatian is a vital component of living in Croatia. I wouldn't just even say succeeding, but even living here. So because there is no other language for as a medium, migrants really do need to learn the language. It does help them also psychologically, so not only socially, but it also helps them psychologically because they feel more connected to the host country and they feel much better integrating in the society because they can be helped on multiple levels.
Are there any cultural aspects of Croatian language that migrants find especially difficult to grasp?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yes. Some of the biggest problems that we're seeing is that there are, like, for instance, even months of the year. We don't think about it. I never thought about it growing up. It's all the same because it's your own language. But that even the months of the year have different names than internationally recognized, January, February, and so on. That's odd. Then they find it extremely odd that our numbers are also different from female or male. Then they also find it culturally problematic that our nouns have genders that not necessarily match the gender, biological gender. So dad, the word dad in Croatian, tata, is a feminine noun. Because like, what the difference is going on? And the word child in Croatian, dijete, is neuter. So it's neither female or male. And there's like, well, how is that possible? Like, is it only when you don't know the gender? Like, no, even when you know the gender, it's still neuter. Well, why would it be neuter? Well, it's a grammatical thing. It's not really this. So there are aspects of this. Also for those who come from Bantu language groups, so Swahili, Kirundi, and so on, they also need to adjust to the different time measurement. So the time is measured from sunrise to sunset. So in Bantu languages, we would say that 9 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning would be then 6 plus 3 for 9 and 6 plus 4 for this will be, it's a completely different aspect. While the same thing for sunset. While we see from the new migrant waves that we see from workers that are coming legally into Croatia, this is from South America. For them, the key issue is that the school year doesn't start the same time. In Europe, America, Canada, and most of Africa, the school year starts in September. But in Asia, Australia and New Zealand, but also in South America, almost in all countries, the school year starts in January. And it finishes in the fall. And then you have the break. So the school year doesn't even match. So it depends when they transition into Croatia. This can be a problem for them as well when they enroll in school, because usually they come in mid-year or right after one semester.
What methods do you find most effective in teaching Croatian to non-native speakers?
Definitely the most successful method in teaching is interactive. So rather than just dwelling on the grammar, which can be quite complex, we try to activate the speaking part as soon as possible. We focus at the beginning on phrases, something that they would be able to use in a store, with their boss, at work, whatever. So activation of speaking as soon as possible. For some of them that come from different backgrounds, the ones that are not using a Latin script, we do have to focus also reading the Latin script as well.
What role does the local community play in helping migrants learn and use Croatian?
Local communities can be very influential in helping the migrants, first of all, activate their already known phrases and expressions, but it can also foster a more welcoming situation where people are feeling more free to express it. And I do have to say that that is usually the case. Croatians are very much enthusiastic when it comes to their language, and when they see somebody, because it's a small language, so we're so proud when we see somebody trying to learn it. We were once, our group of students were preparing us a dinner. They wanted us to experience some South American dinner. So we were at the Dolac, at the open market, trying to buy some stuff, and they were guiding us what we need to buy for the food, and we asked them to speak in Croatian language. Every lady, every person that heard them speak in broken Croatian, doesn't matter, they were so happy, they were so enthusiastic that I think that did most for our Croatian teaching activities than all of the enthusiasm in a classroom trying to tell them that this is going to be very helpful and so on. People were so happy to see them trying to speak. They were so understanding. Of course, the problem is that most of these people who are selling vegetables and fruits at the market where they speak in a dialect, so there's not a lot of exchange happening. But still, it was really, I would say the local community can be very beneficial, and it can be welcoming to this. And I would say that the local communities usually do respond in a more positive light when they see somebody trying to learn their language.
Yeah, definitely. Do you use any specific tools or technologies to assist with language learning?
So there are various aspects. So first of all, we are always sitting around the table. We are very careful not to make it look like ex cathedra lecture. We're trying to make it as interactive as possible. We try to have a relaxed atmosphere, laughing a lot, understanding our own mistakes, correcting ourselves, and so on. And also, we try to, before class, we try to prepare short, brief explanations on harder points in the language of the speaker. Now, that is less of a problem if you have a group of speakers from Spanish-speaking countries, because Croatian textbooks for learning the Croatian language, they already have explanations in Croatian, English, and in Spanish, because of a large Croatian diaspora in South America, in Chile, and so on. So this has already been translated officially by the Croatian language centers and so on. So we utilize this as well. We try to minimize the use of technology that would distract from a class, but we do try later on to expose them to recordings of different pronunciations and listening to other speakers, because teachers naturally have a tendency that we slow down when we are speaking. We simplify the language when we're talking to our students, and we try to help them as much as possible. This isn't real in the street or in a job or anywhere else. So we try to also expose them to other varieties of pronunciations that would differ from our own.
Okay, so let's focus a little bit about migrant children. How do the experience of migrant children learning Croatian differ from those of the adults?
I would say that it's a vast difference between adults learning the language and children learning the language. Of course, it depends also how old is the child. It is not simply as we say, the child will be exposed and will learn it. This is true, but it depends how old the child is. And it depends even now, like if the child is preschool age, school age, or high school age. When we're focusing on the preschool age and school age, there is a bit of a conflict in the beginning, because the child is trying to master the learning of reading in their own language. And this usually conflicts with Croatian pronunciation. So the sounds for particular letters aren't the same. So there could be a big struggle there. So adaptation into making it more of a play, or making it more of interactive, and making it more of not learning style learning for children is much more beneficial. We make it like a color. Let's guess the colors. And then we do the colors of different flags. So that's how we introduce some of the countries, and then you say Japan, and they would immediately say that it's white and red, and then you say, okay, what about Croatian flag? And so they tell you the colors of the Croatian flag. So they find it as a game. So we focus more on that rather than on specifically grammar rules. Also with children, we don't necessarily focus on learning the inflection of cases in a Croatian grammar as much as we focus on, for instance, correct pronunciation and reading. And then children naturally pick up that certain words will differ. If, for instance, if a noun comes after a verb, you would most likely going to be then in accusative and so on. So they're adjusting to this much more easier. But the approach is more through play and game rather than through sit down, be still, and learn.
Do schools in Croatia provide enough support for children who are learning Croatian as a second language?
I would say that the overall answer to that is no. Croatian schools do not provide enough support for migrants learning the language, with the exception of originally the group of Ukrainians that were sufficiently supported. And I think it was also easier for schools because of the commonalities between languages. That Ukrainian children were very quick in learning the language. In most cases, they were able to surpass in writing and expression some of their Croatian classmates. So that's really speaking volumes of their ambitions and so on. And I would say the educational systems are fairly similar between Ukraine and Croatia. That is not the case necessarily with other countries of origin from the migrants. So I would say that Croatian school would need more support, either from a civil sector or from other more structured programs that would allow these children to integrate better through language learning.
What are the biggest challenges that children of migrants face when trying to integrate linguistically?
The biggest challenge is the lack of support in the school. There is a great desire from the teachers themselves to try to adjust, to try to help them and so on. But teachers at the end of the day must also teach 20 other students in a class. They're also responsible for them. I would say that the greatest challenge is that they're not able to understand the demands that are posed on them in the school, and that later on, as the year progresses, becomes a problem because you need to be ready to move on to the next grade level, and often you're not ready because you're linguistically not where you need to be allowed to go to the next level, and then it becomes a challenge. Do you retain the kid in the same grade level for another year and possibly then socially ostracizing from his natural group? Or do you let him pass through despite the fact that he doesn't have the language capability to follow even more demanding curriculum of the next year? So I would say that this is one of the biggest challenges that it prevents them. When it comes to small kids and playing with friends are significantly more interested in how well you play the sports than how well you speak. And I would say Croatian kids even find it fascinating that in their classrooms, they have kids who don't speak their language and they speak something else, and they all want to befriend them and kind of be nice to them and so on. Of course, that also depends that the school need to support this kind of an environment to a large extent, so they wouldn't turn into bullying, but it would rather be into normal childhood exploration.
How do Croatian language policies impact migrants' abilities to learn and integrate?
Yeah, it would be a better question for me to say, what policies?
Yeah.
There are unfortunately not efficient policies like there were, like I said again, for other groups before, but like since Croatia, this is a new experience. We can see with other groups in Europe what happens when you do not implement those policies, what happens when you don't have them, and what happens when you do have them. So since we are kind of climbing up the hill that has already been passed by many before us in the European Union, because they start having a migrant situation much earlier than we did, we can see what works and what doesn't. So I think that we are in the need of a more comprehensive nationwide policy regarding language learning for children specifically, because this is easier, because it can be done within the school system because you're already in the system, but also for adults, which is more complicated because they're working at different employers and so on.
Are there enough resources and support systems for migrants learning Croatian? If not in schools, then in private organizations or NGOs such as yourself?
No, not by far, because this number is growing, and as migrant workers, as if they are integrating into society, then only a few months later or something, a year later, they are desirous to also bring their family. Sometimes they come alone, either as a single mother, single father, but then they are desirous of bringing their kids back. But the problem we see often is that schools communicate with them exclusively in Croatian, which is natural because they expect them to know the language, but they also are trying to help in a minimal way, but it's not enough. We really need to have a more structured approach in helping them how to access the help they need. I would say that there is enough material in a sense of textbooks. Textbooks are really developed well, especially by the Croatian Language Center Croaticum at Filozofski Fakultet at the Croatian University of Zagreb School of Humanities. They have a huge experience in teaching the language to the foreigners, not necessarily to children. But this can be adopted, and this is what we use. We adopt it to our classroom needs. So this is already structured in a way that is not overwhelming and so on. But are these widely available? No. Are they cheap? Absolutely not. You would need about €60 to buy a book and the text and the workbook per person, per level, language level. So this is a problem. Their materials aren't readily available. Some don't even exist, and the ones that are available are not cheap.
So what are some of the improvements you would like to see to help migrants learn Croatian better?
I think we need to do all hands on deck approach. So schools, civil organizations, NGOs, whoever wants to help should try to help. This is a large number of people. We're talking, I think the recent numbers were that Croatia approved close to 200,000 work permits for countries that third countries. I mean, not EU and not the ones who are actually similar to us. So we need to be able to find out how do we integrate such a massive number of people. If we look at the current Croatian population, this is 7 to 8% of our population. So we need to do something about it. The more we help them, the more they'll be able to integrate, and we will be richer for it. I think we also need to remember that except for the brief period of the years of the Cold War, so since World War II to the fall of communism, that was the period when the borders were fixed. Periods before that, they were very flexible. We're all migrants in some point in our histories. We all came from somewhere. We all transitioned somewhere. Croatia has a huge diaspora, which means that our own countrymen are somewhere else, welcomed somewhere else, supported somewhere else, and learned the languages and integrated somewhere else. We need to reciprocate this. It will make our lives better, and it will make the lives of migrants and their children much better.
Yes, definitely. What advice would you like to give to migrants struggling to learn Croatian?
Don't give up. I think when we compare Croatian language to other languages, like for instance English you can start speaking with a fairly limited grammar, but okay vocabulary. Croatian is unfortunately not one of those languages. You need to have a sufficient amount of grammar in order to be able to form sentences. But not giving up is the one most important advice that we can give to people, because if you don't give up, you do see your own progress. And another thing is, we all need to, when we're learning, we need to get rid of a feeling of shame. You need to be comfortable with being embarrassed. That's the key to learning. If we're all too worried about how we look, we're not going to learn. So the more embarrassed we are, the closer we are to the goal. Because we all know that we're not speaking correctly. We know that we're pronouncing something wrong. But if you're too uncomfortable with that aspect, then you will block yourself and prevent yourself from speaking. This is not something that children struggle with. Sometimes we're having an adult class and kids are playing in the background because we allow all of our migrants to bring their children to play in case they have nobody else to watch the kids, because sometimes that's the only option for the parents. And then in the middle of a class, we're saying some number like 98, and then you hear a kid in the background screaming in Spanish to his mom, how do you 98 in Spanish, So it's like they are so spontaneous, and it's easy for them because they are not concerned with their public image. How do I look? How do people perceive me? I don't care. I know the word, I'm going to say it, So, and I think that's the approach we need to have. Be more like kids.
Yeah, yes. What has been the most rewarding part of teaching Croatian to migrants?
Seeing them not give up. I see, when I see people, I know Croatian. I would say now that I'm teaching Croatian, and I've taught it to many different groups from many different countries, you see how complex this language is and how problematic it is, because we, both you and I, we've learned it growing up. We didn't even learn it. We took it, it's like literally, but seeing it for them, progressing and pushing through, despite, life is hard. These people sometimes struggle with their employers. They struggle with their landlords. They have problem with the family back home. Sometimes the family back home is sick. They need to send some medication. Life is tough. Life is extremely tough. And you see them struggling through all of that, yet they still keep pushing through and trying to learn the language. Some of them give up, but then they come back to the next class and they keep pushing through. I think that's the most rewarding part.
So Kristijan, thank you very much for sharing all your experience and knowledge about this topic with us and with the Schooling Hub project.
Thank you. I think this is a very important topic, and I think it's very important to talk about it publicly.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your precious time with us. Keep in touch and follow the updates on the website www.schoolinhubproject.eu. Stay tuned and help us with your suggestions to build a more inclusive society.